Hello, everyone. This is Mary Jones. I'm a Senior Education Consultant with Husch Blackwell's Higher Education Group, and we're excited to continue our series of webinars for WICU today with our topic about Clery compliance and ensuring accurate reporting. Before we begin, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. At the bottom of your audience console are multiple application icons for your use during the program today. Let me just take a quick minute to highlight a few of those key icons for you. If you have any questions during the webcast, please submit your question via the question box. We'll try to answer questions during the webcast today, and if we need a fuller answers needed or we run out of time, we'll answer it later by email. And because we're all in remote locations, we're going to do our best to make sure all this works seamlessly for everyone. We appreciate your participation and encourage you to submit questions. There's also an icon to assist you with your viewing preferences. Also, you can expand your slide area by clicking on the maximize icon at the top right of the slide area, or you can drag the bottom right corner of the slide to adjust the size. If you have any technical difficulty, please click on the help icon. It has a question mark and provides information regarding common technical issues. Also, Chrome works best, we found, and if your screen freezes, clicking F5 should refresh it and take care of that. A copy of today's presentation is available in the resource list, and there are a couple of other resources there for you as well that will be helpful. Recording the webcast will be available tomorrow for watching and sharing, and a link will be and a recording will be emailed to you along with a certificate of attendance. So with that, I'd like to introduce Haley Hansen, attorney and leader of Husch Blackwell's Higher Education Group, an expert on all things Clery. Haley, these are challenging days for everyone, and we're looking forward to hearing from you.
Thanks, Mary. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so happy that we could continue on with this presentation today, even though we had to change it to a remote location, but very happy to be presenting and really welcome any questions that you may have. We changed the agenda a little bit based on the times that we're living in. And so the agenda today is coronavirus considerations, COVID-19, what does that mean with Clery, and what are the institution's obligations. Then we're going to talk a little bit about crime statistics and different scenarios about some common crime reporting issues that we see as we look at institutions' annual security reports, and then finally end on campus security authorities. As you're looking at things, I know that you're all very busy right now, but as you're looking at the annual security report and October 1st deadline that's coming up, what do you need to make sure that you're doing in terms of accuracy regarding crime statistics and campus security authorities? So those are a few of the things that we're going to cover today. I do apologize as I'm fighting a little bit of a cold, so hopefully my voice will hold out during this hour. So let's talk about an overview of the Clery Act. Obviously, you're on this call because you're dealing with Clery at your institutions, but the obligations kind of break down into these 6 different areas. Number 1, making sure that you have appropriate policy statements in your annual security report. And it's unbelievable how many schools aren't able to meet this obligation. And institutions that have on-campus housing have nearly 100 policy statements that they're responsible for in their ASR. And so making sure that you have all those policy statements, even things that you think don't apply to you, but still the department has interpreted those policy statements as being necessary, and so you must state things like, we do not have a memorandum of understanding with local law enforcement, instead of leaving that silent within your ASR. So we see a lot of noncompliance issues for missing policy statements, and one of the bigger areas for emphasis from this department of education and the Clery division has been really focused on the Violence Against Women Act and policy statements within VAWA. Also, crime statistics, that is the number 1 area of penalty for schools of either under-reporting or over-reporting crime statistics. And some of the more areas in which we see this happen very, very often is that there is a disconnect between sometimes our student affairs or student services, whoever is enforcing your student code of conduct and reporting accurately to your Clery officer, or whoever's putting your annual security report. And so we've seen drug and alcohol violations be underreported and overreported at institutions that has led to Clery fines. Your annual security report is October 1st, as you know, and contains information from the previous calendar year. And so the department really looks at this year's ASR in October, even though we are in unprecedented times right now, as all the information you should be able to have collected and to request from local law enforcement to be able to comply with that date. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about what the department has said on that in a few minutes. And then campus alerts, making sure that you are complying with your obligations for emergency notifications and timely warnings, especially in this time with COVID-19, and talking about that. Security departments obviously require you to have a daily crime log, and that crime log be updated and available within 48 hours, business days of crimes that were reported on campus. And then finally, on-campus student housing, making sure that you have appropriate policy statements, including your missing student policy statements, and appropriate and accurate reporting for on-campus housing. So let's talk about what guidance we have so far. And as we all know, with COVID-19 and the coronavirus, this is changing on a daily basis, but information that we've heard from the department so far has given us some indication as to how schools should proceed with reporting and compliance with the Clery Act. So let's talk about this scenario before I launch our first poll question. Your emergency response team at your institution receives a notification that an employee has been diagnosed with COVID-19. Should you send an emergency alert to campus? And so I'm going to launch that to the audience. And so if you would answer this question, in the case of an employee that's been diagnosed, should you send an emergency alert? The answers are yes, no, or I have no idea. So if you go ahead and click your response and send that in, then I will show you the results in just a second. So it looks like we're 33% all the way of individuals that yes, no, and I have no idea, which is probably one of the reasons that you tuned in today to listen to this webinar. So all the way down the line, we have that ability. Oh, I'm sorry, then I went into our next poll question before giving you the answer. So the answer, now we're changing a little bit to no. I guess we're getting a few more responses in. So the answer from Jim Moore is that if you have an employee or you have an individual who's been diagnosed with COVID-19, that does constitute an emergency notification, and that you should be sending an emergency notification to your campus community. It was very clear from indications from Jim Moore that you need to make sure that you notify your campus community of that first confirmed case. But Jim Moore said he doesn't believe a new notification is required for every single confirmed case after the first case. And so it's important to include that information. And the notification is going to be important in terms of how the information is communicated, which leads me right into my next poll question for you, which is, let's say that you're going to have your president or your chancellor email about the communication about the situation instead of sending your normal emergency notification. Is this sufficient from the department? Yes, no, or again, I have no idea. So let me give you a second. So again, you're going to send out your emergency notification, but instead of going through your normal process, you're going to have an email from your president. All right, so let's go ahead and show you the answers thus far. And the answer is no, and that is correct. That is not going to be a substitute. If you are required to have an emergency notification for a COVID-19 confirmed positive case that has been on your campus, you need to send it out in the same format that you would send out any other emergency notification. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what needs to be in that communication and how that looks. So let's talk about this communication. I'll switch to our next slide for this. Your information should include the confirmation. It should include steps that you've taken to mitigate the risks, talking about steps that the campus community can do to mitigate risks, things that we've all heard before as, now social distancing, wash your hands, all of those things that we've heard. It should not include any personally identifiable information. And if you think that you're facing a situation where you think you have to give out personally identifiable information, please, please, please contact your legal counsel prior to putting that in a notification. And I say that because the EEOC and other employment agencies have weighed in to say that this is personally identifiable health information that is protected and cannot be disclosed. So although you could disclose to a group, let's say that this employee worked in a particular department and may have been exposed to people within that department, you can notify them and let them know that they have been in contact with somebody who is a confirmed positive or presumptive positive for COVID-19, but you cannot provide their specific name. And the only time in which, in some of the information that we've been sifting through, there's a lot out there right now, the only time that was even considered, and again, this is why I would tell you to check with your legal counsel, is when somebody is deliberately trying to spread the virus. That is unlikely, and so therefore you're not going to want to include in the information that specific individual. Now let's switch to say that a student, that you've had a student who has come back from a study abroad and in coming back came back to campus to move their things out or do whatever they needed to do, and we're back on campus and now is a confirmed positive. Again, if it's your first case, you still need to put out an emergency notification according to Jim Moore. That needs to go out, and he wants to make sure that when you are spreading information, it was his specific words, and not panic. So making sure that you are providing information and the action steps of the institution regarding that information. But that is going to be something that you're going to need to give out. Remember that emergency notifications can be segmented. I think you need to be very careful about this, because if some people receive an emergency notification of some segmented population, especially smaller campuses, and others don't, they're going to think they're not getting all the information, or someone's trying to hide something. So it can be segmented, because emergency notifications specifically in the Clery handbook say they only need to go to individuals that need to know to protect their own safety and the safety of others, but I wouldn't recommend it on these types of notifications if you have somebody who is testing positive. So that's something you really need to be aware of and need to consider as you're moving forward. All right. So again, the emergency notification needs to be the same as which you would send out any other emergency notification. You can, though, say check your campus email or other update to include more information. So let's say your president wants to include more information. You can provide that additional information through the emergency notification text process, or however else you send out your emergency notifications, and link it to another notification. So I think that's something that's important to understand as well. All right. So what can we expect from the department regarding enforcement of your daily crime log requirements, or even extending the October 1st deadline? So on this webinar with Jim Moore was pretty clear that you should still be updating your daily crime logs. He indicated that he didn't think that on Clery audits that it was going to be something that they were really going to look at if, for other reasons you could not get it updated within the 48 hours, but that is still something that, within those 2 business days, essentially, that's still something that you need to be doing, but just advising institutions to really do their best to keep the logs up to date, and understanding that there's other important things that are happening right now. Will the October 1st ASR deadline be extended given the circumstances? What we're hearing so far is that they're talking about it, but they're likely not going to make a decision until things play out a little bit more to see how long this may last. And as of right now, there really isn't an indication that it's going to be extended past October 1st. So I would still be collecting information and making sure that you are proceeding as if your October 1st deadline is going to be your deadline, and that you are not going to extend that deadline is not going to be extended. So what does that mean for you right now? Right now that means that, in March, April, May, that's the time that you need to make sure that you are identifying all your non-campus property and determining where students have been for non-campus property and sending out letters to law enforcement. We anticipate there's going to be a backlog as things get up and moving again, and so getting those letters in, having documentation that you requested those crime statistics from local law enforcement in those areas in which you had non-campus property is going to be extremely important, and it's not going to be very helpful to you if you start this process in August. So really think about that. So if you have, obviously most of you have athletic teams, and so if a sports team or multiple sports teams has stayed in the same hotel more than one night. And if that's the case, that's non-campus property and again, we're talking about the time frame right now of January 1st, 2019 to December 31st, 2019. So just the 2019 year that you're going to need in your data for October 1st, 2020, you're going to need to start sending out those letters and making sure that local law enforcement has those letters, that you give appropriate time because of the backlog that's going to happen. And waiting until the last minute, I've even had some institutions that wait until the first part of September to send out those letters, and you're likely not going to get information back that's not going to be sufficient in terms of your compliance. So make sure that you are continuing to proceed as if your October deadline is in fact your deadline. And then finally, we're seeing some movement from the Senate and the House talking about Clery compliance officer designation. A lot of us already have one of the Clery compliance officer designation, but really direct schools in this legislation to ensure the accuracy of timely reporting and sexual violence on campus. The legislation is pretty simple and really just kind of adds to direct that you would actually identify an individual on your campus that is your Clery compliance officer, and that individual would make sure that all the reporting is correct. So it looks like we have one question that's come in regarding COVID-19, and so I just want to go ahead and stop before we kind of transition off of this topic, which I know is really, really important, and that is, what if an employee is at home and has COVID-19 and is no risk? And so the question is, when were they last on your campus? And if they were on your campus in a time in which they could have been positive or could have carried that COVID-19 without symptoms, the department wants us to err on the side of an emergency notification, and that an emergency notification should go out, again, not identifying any individual. But we've had, and 14 days is usually the time period, we've had situations in which somebody hasn't been on campus for 14 days and now has tested positive after that fact for COVID-19. In those situations, then they haven't been within your Clery geography for that period of time, and so therefore they would not, they have posed no risk to the campus because they haven't been on campus. But even if they had no symptoms and were on your campus 7 days ago and now have been diagnosed with COVID-19, you need to send out an emergency notification. Usually use that 2-week window as the time frame. I'm telling you this as the best practice from what we know right now. There has not been direct guidance regarding this. So I want to be very clear that this is my interpretation of the guidance that has been given regarding COVID-19. Many law firms and other schools have asked the department to put out information regarding compliance with Clery and COVID-19. They've indicated that they're considering that. The questions, I think, become of whether if they're trying to answer frequently asked questions, whether that leads to even more questions of what hasn't been answered. So I don't know if they're going to put out anything or not. If they do, certainly we will notify WACU and make sure that that information is placed in your portal so that you have access to it. And just to be clear, I think Mary mentioned this at the beginning, but this webinar is going to be in the WACU portal, and we've already uploaded COVID-19 tool set for you in your WACU portal. So make sure it's a free portal, free access. You don't have to be a Husch Blackwell client. It's part of your membership in WACU, and make sure that if you don't have access to that and you need it, you can email Kathy or others at WACU, and we'll make sure that you get access to it. But there are resources for schools and in that WACU portal. The other thing I will let you know is we are going to do a Husch Blackwell education webinar answering really kind of just a town hall where we're answering the most frequently asked questions from our clients. And since we have nearly 300 clients across the country, we've been getting a lot of questions regarding COVID-19. That's going to be on April 2nd, and that will also be placed in your portal if you're not able to join that webinar from noon to 1 on April 2nd. So hopefully some more tools. With that, Mary, I'm just going to ask you real quickly to jump in and let me know if anybody else got a question regarding COVID-19.
There's one question about what's the role of the health department in with this, with somebody who had potential exposure.
In terms of reporting?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. Well, typically, I mean, it depends by jurisdiction and by state in terms of what the health department is going to do. But typically, the health department is, unless they believe there's an ongoing threat, are not going to reach out directly to the employer. Typically, unless they believe that there are others that could be infected and need to be aware of it or could have come in contact. So that's typically where we will see this. Most of the time, this information, and in my experience so far in the last 2.5 weeks, has been that the employee themselves are reaching out to HR, others, and want people to know so that they are being so the others are being notified that they may have come into contact with. And again, you need to put out that first emergency notification that somebody within your campus community has tested positive, identify the steps, go through all the action items that I just talked about, but you wouldn't have to do for cases 2, 3, and 4. So hopefully that helped and was we were responding to the right question. So. All right, with that, I'm going to go ahead and then talk about crime statistics and kind of move off of COVID-19. Again, we want to be a resource for all of you. If there's anything else, other questions that you're having regarding this, let us know as well. I think the town hall will be very helpful because I do believe that a lot of institutions have the same questions, and we're going to try to answer as many of those as possible and are extending that webinar a little bit longer past 60 minutes to make sure that we can do that. So let's talk about crime statistics. All right, as we look at crime statistics, first of all, it's the #1 area which we see Clery finds is people that misclassify crimes. And in looking at that, we really break this down into categories of crimes from primary criminal offenses, hate crimes, arrests and disciplinary referrals, and then VAWA offenses. And I put in red the changes that are now old, but they are from the changes to the 2016 handbook. We've been being told from the department that the 2019 handbook was coming out and 2019 has passed, and we have not gotten a new handbook. And so we were waiting for it, as well as waiting for all the new regulations regarding Title IX. And with everything that's happening in our country, we're unlikely to see that fairly in the next weeks or months, but that's still something that we've been told is in the works to put out a new now 2020 handbook. So the primary offenses did not change, although rape actually changed from forcible to non-forcible to rape, fondling, incest, and statutory rape. And the definition of fondling is fairly expansive, and so there's been a lot of change on college campuses in terms of the number of fondlings that have been reported under that particular category. So that's something that I think is important, and make sure, I know almost all of your ASRs have made sure that you are looking at that. The next is the hate crimes, and as we talked about, hate crimes, really breaking the hate crimes into the 8 different bias categories, but the hate crimes have to be linked to the crime occurred due to a hate crime. So it has to be, it can include those preliminary or primary offenses that we talked about up above, but also includes larceny, theft, simple assault, intimidation, destruction of property, and vandalism. And then the next big bucket is arrests and disciplinary referrals, which we talked about earlier, in that it's an area in which we see a lot of over-reporting and under-reporting. And a lot of times the campus security department is really relying heavily on somebody within student life or student affairs that is talking about the student code of conduct. And at times what happens is that they don't have a real understanding of Clery, and so they may be inaccurately reporting and feeding those numbers, and there's not a way to do a check and balance of those numbers at times, and so we get to that inaccurate reporting. And then finally, VAWA offenses, so dating violence, domestic violence, and stalking, and rape is also included within the VAWA offenses as well. So, all right, let's ask you a poll question. So Julia Parker reports that her ex-boyfriend had sex with her in her residence hall while she was unconscious after a night of drinking. How should this incident be reported or disclosed? The first one is one incident of rape on campus. Second is one incident of rape on campus and one incident of rape on on-campus student housing. The next is one incident of rape on campus and one incident of on-campus student housing, and then add one incident of dating violence, both on-campus housing and on campus. And then the final is need additional information to determine if Clery applies. So why don't you take just a second and answer that poll question, and then I will show the results. Okay, so we have kind of what we thought. Needing additional information to determine if Clery applies. The information that we currently have, if you look back at the question, and I'll just move this back for you just so you can see this. She's on campus in her residence hall in which the alleged rape occurred, and she's reported that a rape has occurred. And so it's going to be Clery reportable because that's where we are. We just need to determine then whether or not it's what category it's going to fall into. So let's talk about one instance of on-campus rape. That is incorrect because you have to make sure that things that are reported on campus also are reported on on-campus student housing. So it looks like it's double reported, but it's not. Anything that's in on-campus student housing also has to be in on-campus, and the numbers in on-campus should likely be larger than the numbers in on-campus student housing. So that's an easy mistake that people make, but it has to be on there as well. In this scenario, which comes directly from the handbook, the department wanted us to consider the fact that this is under the definition, this is dating violence as well, because they were in a dating relationship with this ex-boyfriend situation that has been alluded to. And so I think you'd maybe need a little more information regarding the dating violence piece of this, but likely you're going to have enough information from the student that you would likely be reporting it definitely of rape on campus and on campus student housing, but probably dating violence as well, and more likely with the information that we have, that's the category that I would be reporting it in. So that leads us to a question of the hierarchy rule. And when there is more than one offense committed during a single incident, you are only supposed to count the most serious offense. So you're asking me then, why did we count the dating, violence, and rape in that if that was all within one incident? And very specifically, the hierarchy rule only includes the listed areas that we have on here. So it only includes those primary crimes. So murder, non-negligent manslaughter, manslaughter by negligence, sexual assault, robbery, aggravated assault, burglary, and motor vehicle theft. So those primary crimes are included within the hierarchy rule. The exceptions to the hierarchy rule is arson is never included in that hierarchy rule. You always report all of the arsons. Sexual assaults also come out, especially if they're with VAWA offenses, and so dating violence is a VAWA offense. So that is an exception to the hierarchy rule in which both would be reported if you meet the definition of dating violence. And then arrests and disciplinary referrals are exceptions to the hierarchy rule, but remember, only arrests are reported in Clery statistics, not the referrals. And so those disciplinary referrals are not going to be included in your Clery statistics. So essentially, if you have a situation in which somebody violated your own campus policy for drinking on campus but were 21 years old, so didn't violate the state law, that is not going to be included in the Clery statistics. So that's important to understand as well. All right, here's the next one that we get a lot of questions about in addition to the hierarchy rule is a security office receives a call from a distressed student. And they say, I've been robbed. I don't know who did it, but the thief broke the lock on my dorm room door and stole my laptop and phone. Please help me. So your next poll question is, how would you log this crime? Is it a burglary, a robbery, larceny, theft, or a non-Clery crime? I'll give you a minute and let you respond. All right. So it looks like you have all, hopefully everybody's responded, but let's see where we are. So good. We are at 90% of us are responding burglary. So this is a Clery crime. So let's go through why this is a burglary and not a robbery. And of course, individuals can say things as they are reporting it. It doesn't necessarily mean it meets the definition. So we've got to make sure that we are meeting the definition of whatever crime we are putting down on our on our daily crime log and our Clery report. Our ASR, as we're moving through how to classify these crimes. So a robbery is taking something by force or threat of force and putting that victim in fear. And in doing so, by threat of force, we have been in a situation where there's some sort of threat. In this situation, there was no threat that was made at all. Somebody had broken into the dorm room and stolen items from the actual dorm room. A burglary requires that unlawful entry of a structure. And so in this case, if you can, in situations in which a student can rule out, let's say they live alone, or you can rule out the fact that the roommate did it, so it's not, if a roommate would steal something, it wouldn't be unlawfully being entered, then you can appropriately classify that as a burglary. And then finally, larceny theft, and that is those situations in which you have unlawful taking of those possessions, but only if you have a hate crime that you've determined. And nothing in this explanation would talk about that this would be a hate crime in any way. If it was a larceny theft and it was let's say that it was somebody who was invited into the dorm room and was there with a roommate who stole the laptop, you've had situations that happen like that before, but it wasn't an unlawful entry into the room, then larceny theft, if it wasn't based on a hate crime, would simply be placed on the daily crime log. It would not be included in your annual security report under your crime statistics. So those distinctions are extremely important. We have a lot of individuals who have a lot of burglaries, and so that can be very it's a signal to the department sometimes that you may not understand, because that the school may not understand the difference between some of these, because situations like somebody had was in let's say that you have a locker room in some sort of gym facility on your campus, and something was stolen from someone's locker in that room, but the room has access to all your students. Any of your students can use the locker room. That's still not unlawful entry in a structure. A locker is not going to be a structure. So those types of things that are taken. Same thing when you have situations of things being stolen from motor vehicle or from a car, from a motor vehicle. It's not a motor vehicle theft because the car itself hasn't been stolen, and it's not going to be a burglary because it's an unlawful entry into a structure according to the handbook. So think about those things as you're kind of parsing through how to appropriately record. Why does this matter? It matters because of enforcement, and we've really seen an increase in the amount of enforcement. So I pulled out Green River College, was an institution that had a program review that was open for a Clery program review and was resolved in 2018. They are a fairly small school, but had notable fines regarding their reporting their statistics, and so they had a $100,000 fine because they reported 10 robberies in 2012 and 13, and some of the examples I just gave you were things that they had reported as robberies that were not robberies, that were either larceny or one was a burglary, those types of things. And then they underreported burglaries in 2014, so there was a lack of understanding of these areas. And they had a $35,000 fine for underreporting of forcible sex offenses. So their fines for 13 misreports were a total of $145,000, which gets very expensive. And remember that the Clery audits that are coming out now are based on a time frame in which the fine per violation was $35,000 per violation. Now the fine just went up in February of 2020, and it's $59,000 plus per violation. So right about $60,000 per violation if you misreport one of these crimes. So why these things are it's so important to get your statistics right. Another area in which there's kind of institutions seem to overlook is they're trying to get their data into the department's website quicker than their ASR is coming out, and there may be changes or differences between the two at times, and sometimes that can launch as well a Clery review. The most common way in which you can have a Clery audit is that your federal financial aid office has a program review, and now part of the program review is to look at Clery. The program reviewers are really focused on federal aid, and so if they look and see any discrepancies within Clery when you're having that program review, they simply send that information on to the Clery team. The Clery team will then take a look at it, and they'll decide whether or not they want to fine within the program review of what was identified while the team was on campus, or they want to do a full-blown Clery audit at that institution. And we've seen really a 50-50 split in the number of audits between public and private schools. Some years it flips a little bit, and where you'll have more audits of public schools than privates, and then the next year it seems to flip the other way. There'll be more private schools than public schools. So, but the teams are getting larger. The the emphasis on Clery under this administration and the Obama administration has been very clear that this is something that both administrations feel very strongly about and want to enforce. And so we can kind of look at, as we look towards the election, whether President Trump stays in office and the administration continues. Again, still a really strong focus. Secretary DeVos has been very clear that for higher education, Clery is one of her #1 priorities, and said that in 2017, so quite some time ago, and has focused on it. And under the Obama administration, if the presidential candidate is Joe Biden, likely you'll see similar policies from the Obama administration if that happens. But it's very difficult to read the tea leaves about even who would be the candidate and what would happen in that election as we look at it today. Either way, I think, though, it's clear we're going to see more and more enforcement. So, and, this is now we've seen Michigan State get the largest Clery fine in history of $4.5 million, and a lot of it was failing to properly report incidents and disclose crime statistics and issue timely warnings. Those were a big area of what Michigan State did, or what the department said that they were not doing correctly as they were reporting their crime statistics. So important considerations as you're looking at enforcement and how that may apply to you. And I know that there's at least been 1 to 2 Wisconsin schools that have had Clery audits recently, and have at least one, their final program determination report was issued within the last 18 to 20 months. And so the department is certainly touching all 50 states and issuing their fines. All right, so let's move on to Campus Security Authority and really what that looks like. I know we have about 20 minutes left, and I do want to save some time for questions. So if you do have questions, Mary's going to ask me questions that you send in at the end of this, but feel free to send in questions. So one of the areas that Michigan State was really hit hard on was failure to identify Campus Security Authorities, CSAs. And what we've seen over and over again is this, and it's frustrating, so I understand and can feel your pain regarding this frustration, this sentiment in the Clery handbook that says you don't have to do any formal training of campus security authorities, but then we've seen audits that say your crime statistics can't be correct unless you've done training or unless some way you've ensured that all your CSAs are appropriately reporting. And so really a focus on CSAs and institutions in the review of Michigan State, specifically when the reports were coming in regarding Larry Nassar, Michigan State had, I think, right around between 50 and 60 campus security authorities campus-wide, and now has close to 2,000. So a lot of question in some of these audits is whether or not you are under-identifying who your CSAs are, and that you're relying solely on your security department or police, if that's what you have on campus, but that those are CSAs, of course, but that there's a much larger category that institutions are really failing to capture and missing. So let's talk about that. So a campus security authority, the 4 different categories, obviously campus police, campus security departments are going to be CSAs clearly and are very well trained. I don't think anyone has an issue with how well trained our police or campus security departments are to report. Individuals who have any responsibility for the campus security but don't constitute as police or security. So, those that you have put in charge of monitoring entrances or exits or those types of things are all going to be CSAs. And any individual organization specified in the institution's statement of campus security that also is providing information is going to be a CSA as well. This 4th category on this slide is what I really want to turn your attention to and why I put it in bold, because it's any official in the institution who has significant responsibility for student and campus activities, including student housing, student discipline, and campus judicial proceedings. So as we've seen that, the requirement again says that you must have a process to designate and reevaluate CSA designations at least on an annual basis. And in an audit, that process must be documented and you must provide the rationale. So in the audits that I've worked on with schools, I've worked on many of them, to understand that even in the audit letters that were given to Michigan State or other large schools versus our community colleges that I work with, or schools that don't even have on-campus housing, or I've had a school that was audited that had 1,000 students. Regardless of what size your school is, they send you the same request in the audit letter. It is the exact same 20-some paragraphs of detailed information about what they want. And they want to understand your process of how you have identified campus security authorities and what you do to update the list of campus security authorities. So let's give an easy example. Let's talk about your RAs if you have on-campus housing. How do you make sure that somebody is notifying you within residential life of when an RA quits and there's no longer a CSA because they've been identified, or when somebody new has been hired, or how those changes will have been made and how they have been notified that they're campus security authority responsible for reporting. Most of the time that's in their onboarding or on their training at the beginning when they start those positions. But how are they notifying the security department of that? And how do you make sure, how often does that happen so that you have an accurate list of your CSA designations? Separate campuses, you have to identify CSAs for any separate campuses, and you must also consider non-campus locations. So let's say that you're having a faculty member that is taking a week-long service learning trip, and you've designated individuals that are supervising and are identifying that's non-campus property wherever they're likely staying for the week, is going to be something that you designate as a CSA. So how are they getting information that they're a campus security authority and then must report? And then identify the procedure to report the crime. So some instances there is a number that you're supposed to call with whoever they're supposed to notify. Other times it's just the security department. Sometimes there's an online reporting form that can be done anonymously as well. All of those things are requirements, and you must have documentation of those. The handbook recommends that you designate an individual or office to coordinate and oversee CSAs, and that they should be provided training. That's a recommendation. It is not a requirement, but we've seen about 9 out of the 10 2018 and 2019 letters, final determination program review letters from Clery have fined schools for not appropriately following these CSA procedures, not having documentation, and so therefore saying that their crime statistics are in question because they don't know if all of their CSAs reported what they needed to report. And then what is your process to forward that information on, and do CSAs need to keep documentation of their reported crimes, or do they provide that to someone who maintains documentation on behalf of your institution? So all of those things should be considered as well. So here's our last poll question for today. A student mentions to her basketball player boyfriend, Joey, that a number of dorm rooms on her floor were broken into during the basketball game the previous night. Joey tells the athletic director what he heard. What is the AD's responsibility? Number 1, ask to interview Joey's girlfriend to gather more information as to whether or not there's been a Clery violation. 2, document the report. Next, document the report and provide it to campus police and security, or lastly, nothing, because this is just hearsay. The AD is just hearing this from Joey's girlfriend. So let me see what your answers are here. Oh, so far we don't have any. Let's see. Okay, good. We're getting a few answers in. They'll come up on the screen. I don't think I gave you enough time. I'm sorry about that. Well, whoever has responded is right. So they must document and report it to campus police. So looking at the list from the Clery handbook of who is a CSA, some of the individuals that are on this list are very easy to understand that they're going to be a CSA. Others are not. And I will tell you, I go to Division I schools, large institutions that have huge athletics departments, and do training and ask a question of who is a campus security authority, and like 3 people raise their hand. The athletic director and the SWA and maybe one other person raise their hand. All coaches are campus security authorities. They are. Whether or not you're a volunteer coach to an assistant coach to the head coach, you are a campus security authority. Even graduate assistants are considered to be campus security authorities. If you're a faculty advisor, like in that student group that we were talking about that went on a student learning week, those individuals are CSAs. Typical faculty are not going to be CSAs, but everyone else is going to be. Residents, advisors, and assistants, anyone monitoring access to buildings, Title IX coordinator, of course, victim advocates, and any officer or law enforcement, all of those individuals are all going to be examples of CSAs from the Clery handbook. So people that are typically not CSAs are going to be faculty members who don't have any responsibilities outside of their classrooms, Clery staff, cafeteria staff, clerical, not Clery, clerical staff, Clery staff, of course, is going to be a CSA, and then pastoral and professional counselors acting within their roles are they are technically not going to have to report if they're acting as pastoral or professional counselors. Most people understand, because they've got so much Title IX training, that they're a Title IX mandatory reporter or responsible employee, whatever word you want to use in your policy, but they still, there's this real lack of understanding regarding a CSA, and in fact, when institutions have their Clery interviews, they'll ask to interview CSAs and give you somebody from those areas. And if they do not know that they're a CSA, that's not good for your school and don't understand or be able to report. So make sure you consider how you want CSAs to report, what information you're going to require to be in the content, and how timely the report must be. And this is all, again, going to be very important information that they must report with, immediately or within 24 hours. You need to put the timing in there about how quickly they need to report. Although not specifically required, we recommend that you do have some training for your CSAs and let them know that they're CSAs. At a minimum, send them information about what their obligations are and how to report. And then you really should consider having a policy which not only identifies the description of the institution's expectations about what they're going to do, but also the penalties for failing to report. So let's say that you have a sexual assault that allegedly occurred on campus housing was reported to an RA, and the RA did nothing to report it, didn't report it to anyone else. We find out about it because the student goes into the Title IX office. The RA told the student about the Title IX office, but that's all that they had done. They have failed as a CSA to make that report, and so therefore, are you going to allow them to continue on in that role? Are they going to be, what type of discipline, if any? Let's say you have a coach that fails to report. What are you going to do in those situations, and what are those penalties? So identifying a policy that everyone can agree with before you have the situation happen is extremely important, because once the situation's happened, it's people that are involved. It's not now, I know Haley, and I know that she just made a mistake, so let's go easy on her, or let's give her a pass. Those types of things. Or, we've been looking for a reason to terminate this employee, and so here's our reason. Those types of inconsistencies regarding penalties and what that means for employment are going to be very difficult for schools if they don't have a policy that they put in place to really address this. So I was trying to leave 10 minutes. I think I've left 5 minutes, but Mary, I've left a little bit of time. Are there questions that have come in?
Well, Just to follow up on the CSA, someone asked about designated or standardized training for security personnel and CSAs, and you touched on it, but is there some specific things you would recommend for training, perhaps?
Sure. So in training, I really would recommend, you can, use some of our slides here if you'd like to as part of your training materials. You need to identify what are Clery crimes. So that chart that I gave you of primary crimes, excuse me, that goes through the 4 categories of crimes, really identifying what they need to be reporting. You also need some sort of handout or material of what the Clery geography is that you're going to be reporting under, especially when it comes to coaches, understanding that once you have a trip that leads into 2 nights in the same hotel, that is now considered non-campus property, that if something happens within that hotel, we must report it, even if it didn't happen within our student group. If a crime occurs within the lobby or within the breezeways or hallways leading up to the rooms in which our students are sleeping in, those must be reported as well. And so it's important to really understand the basics of Clery. I can usually do for different schools can do a Clery presentation in 30 minutes to really make sure that you hit all those highlights, but you need to go back over and go back over and go back over. When in doubt, report. If you have any doubt, report. Make sure you send the report, and here's who you send it to, and here's the information we need in the report. We need a description of what happened, when it happened, who reported it to you, what were the details of the report, of the report that you received. That information, getting that out there on the front end is very important. The other thing that I would say in a training and follow-up for CSAs is to send out an email. It's wonderful documentation if you ever get audited that you've checked in with all your identified CSAs. Have they reported all that they need to report for this school year? Have they given you everything that they need to have given you? And I like to do that in December because that's usually when our calendar year is ending, to make sure that we have appropriate crime statistics, and then at the end of the year as well. So sending out those emails and just asking them to respond yes. If they respond no, obviously we need to follow up on what they haven't reported. So those are things that can be in the trainings and are important. I'm not an advocate that you need to, go out and spend a lot of money on some online training. Some of the versions that you're already using, possibly for Title IX training and other trainings, may have a component for Clery. Look at it and see if it meets your needs. But I think that a lot of the Clery officers or those in charge of Clery do a really good job of explaining this. And at times, because the training that's done online is so general, because it's talking about any campus, that it's better to do things that are more specific to your campus as well. It makes a larger impression.
Great, thank you. Got another one that is like a scenario question, which usually the answer is you need more information. So this one says, if someone commits a burglary, to commit a sexual assault are both reported in the ASR.
A burglary and a sexual assault would both be reported if it's within one crime, yes.
Okay.
If that's reported, yes, because of the hierarchy rule that sexual assaults are considered, they're always reported, even because it's a VAWA offense as well, even if you have a burglary that's going on. So, but if you'd have a burglary, let's say you have a burglary, a sexual assault, and then their car was stolen, so a motor vehicle theft, then you wouldn't report the motor vehicle theft if those all happen, if that makes sense, because motor vehicle theft and burglary are within the hierarchy rule.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And then this one made me smile. Have there been any Clery compliance investigations that resulted in no fines?
Not that we know of recently. There have been, I was involved in one in 2016. It was a spot check Clery investigation when they seemed to be Clery audits or even program reviews. sometimes the program reviews don't lead to a Clery audit, but a full-blown Clery audit, if the department comes to do a Clery audit, I've not seen one that has resulted in no fine. Now, what I can tell you is that even Michigan State and others that have had these large fines typically appeal the fines, and the fines have been, so the one that was there was a lot of information in the news was the University of Montana, which only has 11,000 students, but they got a $966,000 fine for underreporting crime statistics, including sexual assaults and other crimes that happened on campus. And they worked with the department and appealed it, and they got to a resolution with the department pending before the appeal was decided, in which they ended up paying money over a period of time that really totals around $350,000 versus the $900,000. So there's options. I mean, the big thing is the hit to the media hit, so to speak, of that narrative out there that you don't have a safe campus and you're not complying with the law to make sure that you keep your campus safe. That kind of narrative, once these fines come out, is hurtful to institutions, as you can imagine.
Great, thank you. Well, I think that is all the questions that we have today. And so I think, Haley, I want to thank you on behalf of everybody online today for taking time to walk us through this very important information during these challenging days, and we're very grateful for that. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate our partnership with WICU and all the ways that we can partner together. We hope this information provided was helpful for you and your schools. And as a reminder, a recording of the webcast will be available, and we'll send that link to you by email. This concludes our webinar, and thank you very much.